This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Teresa Barbist. I'm one of the co-founders of SFAA, which is the alumni organization for the San Francisco Art Institute. We are thrilled that for today's talk, we have Charles Boone, composer Charles Boone, and as a moderator, Dicky Bahto. Dicky was at the San Francisco Art Institute from 1999 to 2004 and never declared a major in all of his years at SFAI, but he is a filmmaker. And Charles was teaching at SFAI from 1996 to about 2008, I believe.
2009.
2009. But he was also performing or organizing performances as early as 1965 in the Diego Rivera Gallery. There was a piano present in, I think the performance was in 1986, right? That had a piano in it. Both of them, yeah. So we are just so excited to have you both here. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Dicky. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Maria. So I'll start introducing Charles. So Charles Boone is a composer living in San Francisco who was born in Cleveland in 1939 and educated in Vienna, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. His works have been performed by the San Francisco Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Berlin, Avignon, Ojai, and Juilliard festivals, Music Today in Tokyo, and other organizations. Performers of his works have included Seiji Ozawa, Edo Duarte, and Phyllis Bryn-Jewelson. He has received 3 NEA commissioning grants and was a DAAD composer in residence in Berlin for 2 years. Much of his music is published by Edition Salibert in Paris. His published articles have appeared in Leonardo, Arts and Architecture, Threepenny Review, Sculpture Magazine, and other journals. And he has lectured at the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, the Hochschule der Künste in Berlin, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the University of Chicago, Yale University, Sogyong University in Seoul, Istanbul Technical University, and other places. And for many years, he was an associate professor, of course, at the San Francisco Art Institute, where I met him. And just on a personal note, I want to add also that Charles was one of the first people at the Art Institute I met. He reviewed my portfolio for merit scholarship, and he became one of the most important people there for me, one of the biggest influences on me, along with Janice Lipson. And it's largely because of studying with Charles, mostly in independent tutorials where you taught me how to read music and we studied scores. And I learned about, avant-garde compositions and things that it just had a really enormous influence on my practice that I still think about with every project that I work on. And so I wouldn't be the artist that I am if it weren't for Charles. So I'm really happy to be here with you.
It's very nice. And the reason I asked Dicky, you, to be involved with this is that you are a greatly admired friend, and a colleague in the business that we're in, which is making stuff and showing stuff, our work and so on and so forth. It's been wonderful to have you as a young person. You showed up with a necktie to be judged by the admissions committee and so on and so forth. And you came, and that was what, 27 years ago, and you've been around all that time, and it's been a great pleasure for me. And you provided me with a bio, which I'm not going to read, but I can sort of improvise one. Dicky's, actually, in the old days, it was Richard, and then it was Rick, and recently he's become Dicky Bahto, and I guess that's a sort of nom de guerre or nom de plume, I don't know what. And his work is being shown all over the place. I mean, he travels to Europe. He's shown all over the United States, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and so on and so forth. And this has been an extraordinary thing for me to watch the stuff that you've done. And I could read off all these names that you provided me: the Huntington Library in Los Angeles, the Getty Museum, Museum of Modern Art in New York, Monday evening concerts in Los Angeles, Portuguese television stations, and so on and so forth. Collaborations with various people whom I know and some of whom I don't know, one of whom is Tashi Wada, who was a friend whom I met. He wasn't a student of the Art Institute, but he was a friend that I met through the Art Institute. And Julia Holter, who was another contemporary performance person of great distinction. And these are some of the people that you, Dicky, have been involved with. And it's a very impressive resume that I have to say. This thing was built to be about me and my music, and that's what I want to do is talk about anybody. If you're interested in my music, there's a website and it can be looked up. It's charlesboonemusic.com. Pretty simple, and they're live, not live. They're recorded performances of my music, and the various things about my background and my curriculum vitae and all that kind of stuff. And I don't feel the need to talk about that. So if you're interested, the information is there to be had. What I do want to talk about, however, is something very unusual that happened, namely that the San Francisco Art Institute, a place of great distinction, I must say, for 150 years, if you can believe that, took me on as first a visiting professor, then as a full-time tenured associate professor. And I have no background in the visual arts. I never made paintings or did any of that kind of stuff. But I have a great interest in the visual arts, and among other things, along with architecture and writing and so on and so forth, dance and film. My role at that place was kind of unique in that I was not teaching music classes. I was teaching visual artists. And I want to talk about a little bit of what that experience was for me. I want to talk about some of the things that I brought to the campus. And I want, most importantly, to acknowledge some of the students who were there during my time, a time that I shared with them. And this is what I've taken away from my time at the school, was this extraordinary group of young people, some of whom were exceedingly intelligent, some of whom were incredibly gifted in visual arts in other ways, and some of whom were extremely nice. And those three qualities sometimes came together, that two of them would come together, or maybe one of them, and sometimes there would be some of the students that I encountered there had all three of those qualities, and that was a gift to me during my 13 years at the school. And I want to acknowledge that. So that's the role I'm going to play here. Tashi lives in Los Angeles. He seems to think he's going to move to Paris. I can hardly imagine that. But
Gosh, you mean me, Dicky?
What? Dicky is going to move to Paris, which I wish I had done. My publisher was in Paris, so I had plenty of opportunities to know that that's the world's greatest place. And if you actually go there, I'll be tremendously envious of you. He lives in Los Angeles. He's learning to play the oud, and he's doing painting and all kinds of stuff. So I'm very happy that you're joining me with this. I'm asking you to drop your how do you say, caution, and just speak up at any time that you want that I'm blabbing away. So that's where I want to go. Yeah. I'm a creative person in the arts, a composer specifically, but I've had long-standing interest in the other disciplines, as I mentioned, visual arts, architecture in particular, writing, and so on. And I think I have what I call an enterprising eye and a willingness to speak about what I see. And for that reason, I believe I was able to make myself useful during my SFAI years. Also, I have a broad-ranging interest in all the arts, and those interests played a very important role for me while I was there. As I said, my own stuff is documented on my own work as a composer documented on the internet, pretty easy to find. So I want this time together to be about the school, about my interaction there. I want to start with my background, starting in the fourth grade. There was a guy whose name was, I remember his name very well. It was Casey B. Creekbaum. And Mr. Kriegbaum came in my fourth grade class at Butternut Ridge Elementary School, just south of Cleveland. And he had his arms full of instruments, and he played them all. And I said, now who wants to play what? And my brother evidently had played a clarinet at one point, older brother. And there was a clarinet in a closet at home. And so I said, well, I'll play clarinet. And this I did with Mr. Kriegbaum for fourth, fifth, and sixth grades. I also had private lessons with a man named Omar P. Blackman. And Blackman and Kriegbaum, I guess, were friends. And I had private lessons on the clarinet. Recently, just out because it was a long, long time ago. I'm talking about 75 years ago that I was dealing with these guys. Was it more than 75? I'm not sure. I looked them both up on the internet. I couldn't believe it. Both KCB Kriegbaum and Omar P. Blackman are on the internet, and it was mostly their obituaries. But those guys played a beginning role in my life. After that, my father retired, and we moved to Southern California, where every day for 6 years of junior and senior high school, we had 6 classes every day. And one of those classes every day for 6 years was the band class. And the band class was directed by a man named Ernest Wilcox. And for some reason, we called him Dr. Wilcox. And he may have had an honorary degree that he awarded it to himself. I have no idea. But he was a remarkable teacher. He's the director of the band. Our high school was very small, and the band was always very small. And he made arrangements of all the pieces that we played. We didn't play junky stuff, this sort of high school stuff. We played Beethoven, we played Mozart, we played all these kinds of things in arrangements that Dr. Wilcox made. He was very demanding. He was a no, for lack of a better reason, no bullshit kind of teacher. There was no messing around of any kind, and we admired him for that. Not only did we have every week 6 days of 1 hour band class, but on Thursday nights we had a special rehearsal at the school that to make our band great, which it was. And everybody came. We came because we loved the possibility of working with a guy who was just a complete master, and we admired him. We liked being with him, and it made possible to make really beautiful music. We won all kinds of awards and so on and so forth. And it was because of that at the end of high school, we had to list things that we had done, and at the top of my list of things that I had done at the school was the music class. And after that, I went off to college, and at the end of my high school years, in 1957, there appeared recordings of the complete works of Anton Webern. And Anton Webern, I'd never heard the name before. There were 4 recordings that he wrote very few compositions, but he was one of the most important and one of the most extraordinary composers of the 20th century. And I heard the music and I said, oh my God, I can't believe this. It was incredibly beautiful. And it was some kind of music I'd never heard in my life before. That was 57. In 1958, one recording appeared with, on one side was music by Pierre Boulez, French composer, and the other side was Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, German composer. And their music had grown out of Webern's compositions. Webern died in 1945, and Stockhausen and Boulez were working end of the 40s into the 50s and into the 60s. And that music was mind-blowing to me. It was extraordinary. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard in my life. And it was exciting, it was daring, and it was just incredible. And then in 1960, a recording appeared of Morton Feldman's music. And that was, again, another kind of music that I had never heard before. And it was something that made a great impression on me. So I went off to college thinking that the first thing I would find, that every college would know all about Webern and Boulez and Stockhausen, and none of them did. I moved around from college to college looking for what I could, where these guys could be, where I could encounter their music and learn about it. And I didn't find it, and I didn't know where to go. Luckily, I had been a good boy, and my parents allowed me to go for 1 year to Europe in 1960 and 61. And I said, I want to go to Vienna. And the reason I wanted to go to Vienna was because I knew that was the place of Beethoven, and it was the place of Schubert, and so on and so forth. And I figured that there would be the vibes or whatever it was in 1960. So from those composers. And believe it or not, when I got there, I actually felt the vibes from Franz Schubert, who had been dead for years and years and years. And I enrolled at what's called the Akademie für Musik und Darstellende Kunst, which means the Academy for Music and Performing Arts or Presentation Arts. And quite by luck, by sheer luck, I ended up in the composition class of a composer called Karl Schiske. And Schiske was a generous man. He was a kind man. He was a humanitarian, and he was a spectacular teacher. He was just wonderful. Another teacher that I had was a man called Erwin Ratz. And Erwin Ratz was not a nice man. He was a rather unpleasant man in class. But he had certain qualities. And one of them was that when he was teaching, we talked, it was an analysis class. We talked about Bach and Beethoven. That's all we talked about for a year. And he talked about this music as if it were the most important thing in the world. And that idea grabbed me completely. Ratz had an interesting background. He had been a student of Arnold Schoenberg. He had been an acquaintance of he recorded hero Anton Webern. He was a friend of Webern's. He was at the Bauhaus. He was at the Bauhaus. He's the coordinator of musical programs or whatever was going on there musical wise. So he had an amazing background. The third person I met, there was a man called Friedrich Cerha. And Cerha had a class called Performance of Contemporary Music. I played clarinet still, and I played Cerha. I was in his class. Cerha was again a very friendly and very, very kind man. He was a wonderful, wonderful composer, and during my classes with him, we played music by Alban Berg and Egon Welles and Ernst Krenek and stuff like that. And he was willing to take me on just as a sort of a composer, a student composer off to the side. He led an ensemble in Vienna that played contemporary music, and they specialized in the Vienna school of 20th century composers, which meant Alban Berg, Arnold Schoenberg, and Anton Webern. And they rehearsed, there was a series called Die Reihe, which has a kind of a pun in this series, a series of concerts that also had to do with some theoretical thinking of Arnold Schoenberg. And they performed in Vienna, but before they performed their concerts of these Viennese composers plus other modern composers, they took the concerts on tour around the country. And only after they had toured the country and really learned the pieces, got them down to the most perfect performances, then they performed them in Vienna. And so those performances are simply a knockout. And Cerha allowed me to come to some of the rehearsals, which was very, very kind and generous on his part. And then I was studying clarinet, and I had a very demanding clarinet teacher who had a background which I was familiar with. He was in the Vienna Philharmonic. And his teacher had been a composer I knew, a performer on clarinet that I had known through recordings before I came to Vienna. So that was a very special time for me. So that's where I came, how I got to be what I got to be what I was. That was my background, so to speak.
And Charles, can I ask you a question? Because we're going to be talking a lot about your role in people's lives as a teacher at the Art Institute, and you've said that you're naming these teachers starting in your fourth grade about how important they were. Can you talk a little bit more about like what you mentioned that one teacher in particular? I think it was Shiska who said that, or no, it was Rotz. I think you said that. Made an impression on you because he treated all of the music that he was showing you about as if it was the most important thing. But could you talk a little bit about maybe what some of the other teachers, including your fourth grade teacher, like what you took from them, what made them so important to you, and maybe also about not just important to you as an artist and a musician, but as later as a teacher yourself, what you might have taken from these experiences?
Yeah, Shiska was the most important composer and the most important teacher in my life. As I said, the thing about Karl Schiska was, aside from the fact that he was just a great teacher, he was interested in his students and so on and so forth. But the main thing I think I took away from Karl Schiska was his humanity and his kindness and his thoughtfulness about the students that he was working with, and he exhibited that. And when I went, I had two years in Vienna. One was early '60s, then I was back in '68, '69. I saw Schiska not as a teacher, but he invited us to his place for lunch one day, and so on and so forth. But in the class, for example, he could play a little bit of piano, and so we'd show our stuff, and he'd say, well, you at this place, you could have done this, and he go da 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 on the keyboard, and he said, or you could have done this da 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 da, or maybe you could have done this and something like that. And he didn't say, if when you come back next week you've done any of the things that I've just demonstrated, that's a mistake. I've tried to show you that you can go on. And that was for a young person, very young person, wanting to go on. He said, you can do it. And that was very important for me. I should say a word about Schiska. He invited my then wife and I to his place outside of Vienna, where he lived with his wife and a bunch of kids. And he was very, very kind. And one of his sons was named Lucas Schiska. And Lucas was, I don't know, a 10-year-old at that point. I don't know. And we decided we were going to leave Vienna in the 1st of July. My birthday is June 21st. And we were going to go back and visit the Schiskas. And Schiska was early 50s, but he was not well. There was something wrong with him. I don't know what exactly. And as I say, my birthday was June 21st, and we were going to go back just before we left Vienna. And around the 15th in the evening, there was a phone call, and it was from Schiska's wife. And she said that Schiska had died. And there was something. And I said, is there going to be some kind of a memorial or a funeral or what? She said, yes, it's going to be on June 21st, which was my birthday, my 30th birthday. So we went out to the place and we were at the funeral. And the most important teacher of my life, we were there to bury him. And as I say, the teachers can teach you stuff, but they do it. They can do it certainly by their example as human beings and their exemplary ability to communicate with young people and to say, you can do this, you can do it, go ahead and do it. And that was one of Schiska's great gifts. This Lucas Schiska is very interesting enough. Some years later, my music was published in Paris, and I was out of touch with Schiska's wife. And one day I got a letter that was forwarded from the music publisher in Paris. And it was a letter from Frau Schiska. And she said, at last I found you. Where have you been all this time? And she had said, you'll be interested in knowing that my son Lucas, this little boy who had been at Schiska's, that I saw at Schiska's funeral, Lucas, has become a percussionist. And Lucas has played one of your compositions. And I said, oh my God, what could be more extraordinary than that? And I said, I would like to be in touch with him. And she said, well, actually, he's going to be in the United States on tour with an ensemble, and I'll have him call you. So about 6 weeks later, I got a call from Lucas Schiska, and he was a grown person by that point. And I thanked him for playing my piece. And he said, you don't really know the story of this, why that happened. He said, I was in a music store someplace, and I found your composition that had been published by Sullivan, and he said I bought it, and I performed it. And he said, I then showed, when I was with my mother, I showed her a program of the concert, and she said, "Do you know that that composer, Charles Boone, was a student of your father?" And he said, "No."
Wow.
That for me is it.
That's
Just one of the stories. He played it because he bought it in the store. He wanted to play it.
yeah. Because he was really, when you met him, he was too young to have
He was a
known
kid. I mean, I don't think he was more than 12. He couldn't have been 10.
you.
Maybe 12, I don't know. So that was the story of that. But that's what was important. And that's what, I mean, I can't say every day, but I thought of Xiska all the rest of my life. I think of him now. It's fun to go back and think of him. But when I was teaching, I remembered him on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I think that played a role.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's important. It's very interesting, these the composers that I mentioned, Pierre Boulez and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. I knew Morton Feldman's music, of course, John Cage. I never had profound, deep relationships with those guys, but I met all of them. I met all of those men. I cooked dinner for Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. I cooked dinner for John Cage, if you're ready for that. I cooked dinner for Morton Feldman.
yeah.
And it's they weren't intimate friends by any means.
Yeah. Well, and for anyone in the audience who hasn't had dinner with Charles, he is an extraordinary cook also.
Was not to mention you yourself. I know you're a food. So those are important things, to be able to meet your heroes, and you can do it if you're a. I've said this again and again. If there's somebody you admire out there, write them a letter or send them something like that. And some of those people are jerks. You'll never hear about. But many of them are not. Jasper Johns is one of my heroes, and I wanted to include him in a sort of an homage to Jasper Johns. And somebody gave me his address, and I wrote him, and I said, I want to have your blessings for this piece of writing. And not more than 5 days later, I got a letter back from Jasper Johns, and I said, I'd like to send you the composition when it's finished. And, I sent it back, and he sent another few days later. I got another letter from Jasper Johns. Can you imagine? I mean, this is for me, the greatest painter of our time, and he took the time to do it. A very kind, obviously generous person. And so the moral of the story is, if you have a hero out there of some kind, be in touch with them, and they might, in fact, respond to you, in which case you'll be greatly blessed. So that's some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about. My years, how I got the job at the Art Institute. That's very important.
This is what we want to know.
Story. There were two things I had never done in my life. One of them, I had never taught a class, and the other was I had never sung in a chorus. And I had, in spite of not having taught a class, I had lectured many, many times. I mean, dozens and dozens of times. And they were at universities, and high schools, and museums and galleries and all this kind of stuff. I lectured in Berlin. I lectured in, I don't remember, in Vienna. I remember when I was a student, after the time I was a student. And subsequently, I lectured in Korea and in Turkey and Mexico and places like that. And it was very important, but I had never taught a class. And I had a vague connection with Bill Berkson. Bill Berkson was a teacher at the Art Institute, one of San Francisco's great characters and great poets and so on and so forth. And I wrote, and I think he knew who I was. I wrote him a note, and I said, I have an idea of teaching a class, and maybe the Art Institute would be a place to do it, and namely a class about the relationship of contemporary music with the visual arts and so on and so forth. And he wrote back, and he said, I don't think there'd be any interest in all of that, but I don't want to just throw your letter into the wastebasket, so I'll pass it on to somebody. About, I don't know, 6 weeks later, I got a call from a woman called Hagen Brook. And I didn't know who Hagen Brook was. And she said, well, I'm at the Art Institute. We're so much looking forward to your class. And I said, what are you talking about? What class are you talking about? She said, well, you wrote a letter, and you said you wanted to teach a class. And all I said was what I wanted to teach a class about art and music. And so she said, well, yes, you're going to do it. So that was just typical art institute kind of situation where they didn't have a clue who I was, why something was CV, I suppose, or I don't know what, but that was it. So I went and I taught the class as a graduate seminar, and I met the dean of what is it called, the dean of academic affairs. His name is Larry Thomas, and I got very friendly reviews for the concert and for the class that I taught. And afterwards, Larry said, "Well, what do you want to teach next year?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I have no idea." And he said, "We'll figure out something and do it." And there was a rule at the Art Institute that said if you're a visiting professor visiting something, you couldn't teach more than, I think, 2 classes in a row. And that was the rule. But Larry took an interest in what I was doing, and he broke every rule imaginable. So I taught class after class after class after class.
Yeah.
And they were all grad students. And finally, he said, would you be interested in teaching some undergrads? So I said, well, sure, why not? Which I did. I was teaching both. And I was greatly, greatly interested in being with the undergrads. That for me was a very, very special experience. And that's where, of course, where I met Dicky long ago. And so it went on from there. And I had a number of faculty colleagues that I'd like to just mention: Brett Reichman, Jack Fulton, Linda Connor, Janice Lipson, George Kutcher, Richard Berger, Paul Koss, Carlos Villa, Robin Ballinger, were people that I greatly admired at that school. I also admired John Roloff. I had bought a large piece by John years before that. And it came a time when my wife and I moved into smaller and smaller places. And so that piece is now on display at the Berkeley Art Museum. So those were people who were very, very important to me as among faculty. Another person was Letitia Tsunami. Letitia is a fellow composer and electronics person, a wonderful musician and a performer and composer and so on, so whose work I admire greatly. And she taught there as a visiting faculty person. And she was greatly, greatly admired by the students. And every time you have the name Letitia Tsunami is mentioned about anybody who's at the school, they remark about what a wonderful teacher she was. And also, I think for the same reason that Karol Szyszka was important, namely her humanity and her kindness towards students. And I guess Letitia is out there today. Sorry. And I commend her both for her work as a teacher at the Art Institute, also for her work as a composer and performer and so on and so forth. The building was terribly important at that school, as everybody knows who was there. It was designed in 1925 by an architect whose name is Arthur Brown Jr., a very important architect in the city of San Francisco. He designed San Francisco City Hall. He designed the Opera House at the Civic Center. He designed Temple Emmanuel, and he designed Quake Tower, and he designed the San Francisco Art Institute. So that was a pretty amazing thing. There was a modern addition that was made in the 60s, and that was done by an English architect who lived in San Francisco. His name was Pafford Keating Clay. He worked on it between 66 and 68. If you know what used to be called the French Hospital, it's now part of Kaiser. On Geary and 6th, Keating Clay also designed that building.
Yeah. Charles, can I pause you for a second? Because you're talking about the architecture of the school and architecture in the city, and I know that you didn't want to talk so much about your work, but it does strike me that you have a number of compositions that are named after pieces of art, like the Watts Towers, the Solar One piece, which is named after a solar power plant. And I just wonder if you could talk just like a little bit about what kind of importance architecture has for you in your creative work or your life in general, because it's something that's very important to you, I know.
Yeah, well, it's one of the important things. I said that I had an interest in visual arts in general. I mean, painting and sculpture and all that kind of stuff. And architecture has been one of them. And Merce Cunningham Dance Company has just changed my view of what of what a person can do with their body. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And the thing about architecture is it's a physical space. Music, you know, I sit at my desk when I write music. I put notes down on the page, and I the question is what I was always asked: do you hear your music? And I used to say yes, I do as I'm writing. But then I said I finally got a little thought about it a little bit, and I don't. But I know as I put the stuff down on the page what it's supposed to sound like, so that if an orchestra plays the piece and they go boom, the conductor like that, it sounds pretty much the way I intended it to sound, or what I knew it would sound like, and so on. So it's a totally ephemeral thing, the music business that we're in, that I'm in. But architecture is not, and it's something that you can look at from the outside. It's something you can walk through if you're lucky. You can get into the place. It's something you can actually touch. It's something you can breathe the air in. You can listen to the sound in the space and so on. And that's all. It's a sensual, sexy kind of experience. If you're on the way, if you're in a piece of crap, then that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being in San Ivo church in Rome, and being in I don't know what places kind. So my wife and I were at the La Tourette monastery that Le Corbusier built outside of Lyon. And it's simply the most wonderful building you can imagine. You walk through it. But I'm telling you, I touched the walls at La Tourette with my hands. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that with music. And that's something that's very important to me. The idea of walking through space of that particular building. There's a sense of promenade. You walk here, and then you walk through there, and there's this sense of going from place to place and place. It's just, in a sense, it's like listening to a piece of music. You got this part at the beginning, and you got the next part, and you hear it, and it goes on and so on, so on. So you're passing through space, you're passing through time, and you're passing through sound in music. And so there's that connection.
Yeah, and I also want to go back, just to jump back, because you said that you got the job at the Art Institute originally because you knew Bill Berkson and you wrote to him proposing a class. But of course, you weren't like unknown to people at the Art Institute because you had been very involved in the music world in the Bay Area for some time, and had actually presented concerts at the Art Institute. So I'm actually going to bring up this image that we have, which I believe is from a concert that you presented at the Art Institute. Is that correct?
That's in '63.
This one? So maybe you could talk a little bit about because you jumped from being a student to being a teacher, but there's this time in between that also, you were involved in the Bay Area with a number of things which I could name, but I'll let you maybe talk about some of that a bit.
I'll talk about this event in particular. I had been the Art Institute. There were always things going on there, and of course there was the Diego Rivera mural, all that kind of stuff. I knew that space, and it's just a wonderful. That building is just simply a wonderful place. That's all there is to it. And I was involved with something called the Composers Forum. As soon as I came to San Francisco, it was a long-standing organization that was pretty much dead. And I and two other composers, one of whom I guess is with us, John Patrick Thomas, who lives in Hamburg. John, are you there? I suppose you are. We presented concerts, and I wanted to do something at the Art Institute simply because it was a wonderful place. And so they gave me permission to bring a concert there. And this is me performing. I did it with a colleague. It's a piece actually for solo player. It's called Water Music by John Cage. And but I didn't have enough skill on the piano and other stuff like that to be involved. So my friend Benjamin Borson, who is also on the concert, he played a piece of mine for solo flute. And this is somebody took his picture. I wish the bucket weren't quite on my face. You don't recognize me, but that's me with my hair longer and totally darker, I must say, pouring water in John Cage's Water Music. Then I had in the late 70s, early 60s, late 70s, early 80s, I had been very, very sick, and I got well, and I wanted to do something about my work and so on. And I wanted to get back in the Diego Rivera Gallery. And so I went to the school and said, would it be possible for me to do something in that space? And it was 1986, I guess it was when we did a concert of all of my music, also in that same space. And again, that was an architecture thing. I mean, I think this as everybody knows, that school, that building is a wonderful place. And to be performing my music at the in the Diego Rivera Gallery, that was a big deal for me. It was just a great experience for me. So
Yeah.
that was that. But that was long. That was 10 years before I started teaching there.
Yeah, but you also started a concert series that was called the Bring Your Own.
It's called BYOP concerts, and it's not BYOB, which is Bring Your Own Bottle, but BYOP. They were done in galleries, in particular the Hanson Fuller Gallery, which is downtown on Grant Avenue in those days. I knew Wanda Hanson, I knew Diana Fuller, and they let me organize some concerts in their gallery space there. And they didn't have any chairs, so BYOP meant bring your own pillow.
Mhm.
And those concerts were pretty nifty. I don't know how many we did. There maybe only 3 or 4. I don't know, but they were always packed with people, and it was a very relatively small space. You could get maybe 80 people or something sitting on the floor, and we did some sort of adventuresome stuff there. Evening of Toro Takamitsu, who was in town with the symphony. Toro came and gave an event there, and so that was the Composers Forum gave all kinds of other student concerts and a few professional concerts and so on. Also in the Museum of Modern Art, which used to be at the Civic Center in the Veterans Building. And so that was part of my concert organizing stuff.
Yeah, and I think Caroline, I think it was Caroline Savage mentioned also in a series at the Exploratorium.
No.
No.
If I did, I'm forgetting about it. No, I don't think so.
No.
Okay. So that was it. So those are some of the things. I wanted to just give an idea of some of the classes that I taught there, and they will be. I just want to mention the names because the names will tell you a lot about what I was trying to do there. And again, I was a composer. I wasn't a visual artist. There were classes that were seminars, grad seminars, undergrad seminars. I met with incoming freshman students, which I enjoyed very, very much. Contemporary practices, which I did with Richard Berger for a number of years. And there was something called Humanities B, which is a humanities class that all the undergrads had to take. They had A and B, and I did the second part. But here are some of the titles. There was a series of classes that was called A History of Sound. There was a student, and I think she is with us today, namely Jamie Peterson, who was in a couple of classes. And at the end of one of the music classes, she said, "Why don't you teach a class about the history of sound?" And I thought, well, I don't know what that would be. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe I do know what that would be. And so I taught it, and that was one of the classes that was taught a number of times. And I didn't call it the history of sound. I called it a history of sound, because if Letitia or somebody else had taught the class, they would have had their own view of what the history of sound was. And it was a class that interested me greatly. And Jamie, if you're here, I thank you again and again and again for suggesting that. There was a class called Around New Music. There was a class called Musical Thinking for Visual Artists. There was a studio class called Structuring Sound. There was a class called John Cage, etc. There was a studio class called Voices Make Sound. There was one called The Collective Work of Art. It all began with Richard Wagner. There was a class called Time, Space, Sound, Object, Framing Silence. There was a class called Putting Things Together. Those are some examples. And they were And in addition to that, there were the individual meetings with students in their studios and other students working with various projects that I had dozens and dozens of those things, and they were one-on-one meetings. You're supposed to meet, I think, 3 times during the semester with those students, and we met many, many times more. And that's some of the things that I was doing. I wanted to acknowledge some specific students.
Yeah, I'll bring up the images and maybe you can talk about them when I bring them up.
First of all, I think Michael Dodge is out there. And Michael, if you are, you should know that when I prepared these notes, I did it long before I knew that you would be on this program today, if you're there. You're at the top of my list. Michael was an undergrad, and he had a colleague. We were in the class together called, I think his name was Cameron Scott. And they did a piece, I guess it was a studio class that we had. They did a piece together where they surveyed the building, actually as a physical, visual place that you walk through and so on. But they made recordings in all parts of the building. And they made a kind of map of the building, not through visual things, but through sound. And as I recall, they made recordings and they put them in I don't know, I don't play tape recorders or I don't know what, in suitcases, and they marched around through the building. They did this for a couple of weeks, I think. They marched through the building, playing the sounds back into the spaces in which they had originally recorded them. And that was an extraordinary project. And I remember going into Larry Thomas's office, Larry being the dean, and we were talking about this, and just as we were talking, Michael, I guess, was marching by his window with the recordings that he had made outside. Larry said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, that's one of my students, Larry. It's Michael Dodge and Cameron Scott, and they made this piece." He said, "That's extraordinary." So that's you. Patrick Hector was somebody that has disappeared, and I wish he hadn't. He was the first person that we had 3 classes together. He was a photographer. He went into the Peace Corps for 2 years in Nigeria, and in Niger, not Nigeria. There was a woman called Sasha Shaw in those days. She's now called Sasha Spare. And Sasha was a painter whose work interested me greatly. She actually became a friend, and she contributed an image to the cover of one of my scores. Ben Wood, I suppose everybody knows Ben at this point. I don't remember if he was a grad or an undergrad. I think he was
an undergraduate.
He was an undergrad. He was doing video animations of monuments around San Francisco. And I think the first one he did the video animation of the Diego Rivera mural. And he had various friends and faculty people performing various roles. And if you look at the upper part of the Diego Rivera mural, there's a guy bending over the table, and that was me. He recorded, and he projected these recorded images onto the mural itself. And he literally brought the thing to life, not with the original people, obviously, but with the modern day friends and colleagues from the school. It was wonderful work. And he's done projections all over the city. He did one on Quake Tower and various places downtown and so on. So then I don't remember exactly. I think after he graduated, he went to Stanford as a grad student. I think that's correct. Ben, if you're there, you didn't correct me. And then he went to MIT to get further graduate studies. So that was an example of really extraordinary work. Two of the graduate schools that people like to go to were Stanford and Yale, and a number of students went to both of those places. A student that I particularly was interested in was Rebecca Millsop, Becky Millsop, as she was called. She came with her mother from Arkansas to be checking out the school, and she checked in to be a visual artist. And she was there only 2 years. And the thing about Becky was the fact that she was a super, super intelligent woman who needed much, much more than was offered at the Art Institute. What was at the Art Institute was first class, but she needed more than that. So what she did was she went to City College in San Francisco for a year or two, and then she transferred to Berkeley to study philosophy. And she did undergraduate study, the BA or whatever it was at Berkeley. And Rebecca Milsop, if you're ready for this, was the what is it called? When you give the speech at the end of the valedictorian of her class at Berkeley. It was something. She went from there to MIT, where she got her PhD in philosophy. She taught for a while, and now she's doing something else. She's now back making visual arts. So Rebecca Milsap, Dr. Rebecca Milsap was somebody very extraordinary amongst my students. Tomonari Nishikawa was a experimental filmmaker. He did live performance. Tomonari died a year ago at a very early age of cancer, and we miss him greatly. But what he produced in these years as a filmmaker was extraordinary. Promsudan Auk was a young man who came from Long Beach in Southern California. He was of Cambodian descent. He was born here, but all of his siblings were born in Cambodia. He was a film student at the Art Institute for a while, and he left. But he was interested in Cambodian traditional dance, which he began doing at the Art Institute. And he and I became friends, aside from his being a student that I admired greatly. He went to Cambodia. He was, as I say, he was born here, but he was of Cambodian descent. And he went to Cambodia, where he formed a dance company. Prum was gay, what's the proper tense there. And he formed the first Cambodian gay dance company. During that time, it was extraordinary, the recognition that he got, not only in Cambodia, but everywhere. He traveled all over the place. He became a TED Fellow. If you look up Promsudan Auk on the internet, the first thing that will come up is a TED Fellow. And now he totally burned himself out doing his dance company in Cambodia, and he's starting on a fresh new path. Sang-hee Park, who was a Korean film student, she was a TA. She was not a TA. She was in the graduate class in the lecture hall, and she acted as a kind of TA on her own in projecting and stuff. And she made the class absolutely wonderful. I visited twice in Korea, and it was a chance to see Sang-hee. Claire Jackal, Rick, I think this is the time to bring up Claire's work.
Yeah.
Claire Jackal was in a couple of classes that we had together. And at one point, she signed up for another one. And I said, Claire, I think it's time for you to find somebody else to talk to about your work. She said, oh, I just want to talk to you about it. And I was very touched by that. I think she lost an opportunity to meet some other people in the school, but that's what she did. Get back to the original one, Rick, if you could go back to the houses. Yeah, she did these cutouts of buildings, and she did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And she stacked them up and made, she had them falling off the walls and falling off in the place, and they were absolutely marvelous. The second one, please. The second slide. This is a train crash that she made. It was exhibited by the Oakland Museum in a downtown office space. And I don't know how long it was. It was at least, I suppose, 15 feet long, this train that it crashed, but it's all made out of paper. And Claire was, the work that she made during that time was simply remarkable. It was beautiful. It was funny. And it was the handicraft business of making the work was just mind-boggling. It was just stunning. So that was Claire. Annie Chung, if you could bring up Annie. Annie was not a student of mine. We didn't have a class together, but I used to prowl around the grad studios, and there would be things that you'd say, aha, that was made by somebody at the Art Institute. So there were things that were sort of, I wouldn't say typical, but not unfamiliar in the grad studio. But I peeked into one studio, and here was this work like this and other kinds of stuff. And I said, what the hell is that? And it's extraordinary. I'd never seen anything like that any place, A. And B, in the grad studios, there was something else. And so I made a note. The name didn't stick with me really, but I realized it was a woman's name and that it was an Asian woman and so on and so on. And later on, when I was doing work in the admissions office, there was a woman who was working there as a student and doing stuff, I don't know what, in the admissions office. And I talked to her, and finally I started putting two and two together. And I said, "Are you the person who made these pieces out of sand and glue and all this kind of stuff?" She said, "Yeah, that's me." And she became a friend. And I don't know if Annie's there today. The work is very, very beautiful, and very, very important to me. She was a grad student, and when she graduated, there were two gallerists in San Francisco whom I knew, and so I sent them a note and I said, when you look at the grad studio works, I'll be sure to pay attention to Annie Chung. And Annie, one of those gallerists, gave her a show immediately after she graduated, and the other gallerist didn't give her a show, but she bought one of the pieces in the grad show. So that was Annie's work, and we have a very large piece in our apartment here. It's a long piece of string. It's about 7 or 8 feet long. It's coated with glue and sand. It's a very, very beautiful thing. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It's a big piece that takes up very little space. But that was something that was, her work is very, very important to me. And the other one I want to mention is John Beecham. John was doing film at the Art Institute, and he was working in the library, and books he read. I must have read every book in the library. He worked at the checkout desk, and when he wasn't checking out books, he was reading books that he found on the shelf. And he became a friend when he was a student, and he was somebody I liked very, very much. And after he graduated, he moved east, and he was in New York for a while. Now he's living in Western Massachusetts, and he started doing letterpress printing. And these are just the books that I have of John's that I've either bought or that he's given to me. And he goes on. He's done major things with the Noguchi Museum in New York and other important institutions around the East Coast. And these are some of John's books. And again, John is a friend who I admire greatly. And the work that he's done has been terribly, terribly important. And then, of course, there's Dicky Bahto. And Dicky, we all know, and here he is. And he's going to show some work of his. Again, he did film, he does projections and stuff. And there's even a film that's dedicated to me. I'm very happy to say thank you. Dicky is a long time ago, but I was delighted to have someone dedicate something to me, and that was something that you did. I'm grateful for that. I thank you. And this is a projection piece. Is there a second piece that you have of yours? Is this
No, I just this one.
Yeah. But he's traveled all over the place. He's in Europe. He's in the United States. I mentioned earlier is shown at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Huntington Museum in Pasadena, and every place in between, as well as in Vienna. I know he's in Vienna, he's in Germany, and he's work in France, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I'll add too, just because I know that you are friends with Tashi, not as a student, but this is actually a performance piece that involves like many slide projectors and like a set of, I don't know, like 2,000 or 3,000 35mm slides that I've made over a long time. And it's this particular performance of it was a collaboration with Tashi Wada and a percussionist named Corey Fogel, that we do like an hour-long slide music and image kind of performance.
It's lovely. And I've seen many, many pieces, and there are always things that come away causing me to think about stuff. And the work is good. It's like the architecture. You look at the stuff, and then you go home. You're thinking about what you saw or what you touched or the air that you breathed in those places and so on. So it's real good work. So I'm glad for that. There were 4 students who shortly after not shortly, but over a period of time after they graduated, were written about in the New York Times. And I can't say that I had anything. There was nothing that I offered all these students my goodwill and whatever thing when I saw their work. I talked about what I saw, and that was my contribution. I can take no credit for anything that they've done. I can take credit for the fact that they played a role in my life, and all the people we've talked about so far are among those. But these four appeared in the Times, and this is Trevor Shimizu, and Trevor was in a class of some kind. I don't even remember what class it was, and whether it was a class where he made stuff. No, go keep it there.
Sorry.
And so on and so forth. And when he was here, I remember he was doing, I don't know what you call that word. There was the kind of anime-looking kinds of stuff I think that young people do. Trevor, if you're there, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly. But they were what young kids do. And then when this article appeared in the New York Times, I said, whoa, that is Trevor's work and what he's done. And these four reviews in the New York Times were very, very favorable of what the young people do. Some of them, I always say the young people that I work with, and I don't know, Dicky, how old you are, because you're not a young person anymore. And Trevor certainly is not either. You're old folks or grown-ups at this point. But I was thrilled to be able to read them and pick up the New York Times, and there was Trevor. Another one was Joanna Nigogosian, and Joe had a show of her sculpture. She was one who graduated from the Art Institute, and then she went to Yale. She very kindly invited me to Yale. I gave a lecture in the film showing at Yale. So that was a nice thing for me, of course. And this is a work that she did, and it was the review in the Times was just stellar as a knockout review of this young woman. Sarah Kane was another one. Sarah, I have in my closet here a work that I got from Sarah 25 years ago. And in the meantime, she's gone to other things. This is a window. I think it's 150 feet long, which is in the newest building of the San Francisco International Airport. And it was made out of stained glass that she worked in. But she's shown all over the place. She had local galleries in New York. And she lives, I guess she lives in LA at this point.
Yes, she lives in LA. I'm going to see her on Saturday.
Well, say hello for me.
Yeah, she told me to tell you that she says hello.
hello, back and forth. Anyway, Sarah, she's just gone to town. It was just extraordinary. Another one was Coulter Jacobson, and when Coulter was mentioned in the New York Times, there's nothing but the most wonderful kinds of things that could be said about him. And Coulter, I think maybe you're even here today. And these are some works of his. Is there a second one?
Yeah, a detail from it.
Detail of that. And he's living here. And these are the people that I worked with when they were young. And for me, it's just a gift to be able to look back on the fact that we had a contact in those days, and that all of you out there, have gone and done wonderful stuff. Yeah. There's slides. We did all kinds of stuff. We had suppers at our house when my wife and I we were living on Cap Street. You have a photograph of that?
Oh yeah.
I think there's.
Yeah. And maybe while we look at these photos, Russ, because I think we're not like that we need to end, but we are after 11 now. So I thought maybe it would be nice because you're showing some of your students' work, and one thing that strikes me is that you're talking about there's painters, stained glass, dance, sound kind of performance pieces, all different kinds of work, and you and your own interests have all these varied interests. I mean, you haven't talked a lot about it, but I know, of course, literature is really important to you. You always talk about Samuel Beckett. Architecture is a huge influence on you. And I think I think for me, what's interesting, and why I wanted to ask you what was so important about your teachers, and you identified something that is precisely what I would think of as one of the things that you did do as a teacher, which is to kind of give permission to do. It's not so much telling people what they should do, but showing them that they can do things and encouraging them to do so. And I think that the people you've chosen and their work as students that were significant to you or that you continue to have relationships. I mean, I think it's interesting to see that there isn't a kind of style to it that's unifying, but it is, I mean, for me, it was always really important. What a big influence you had on me was this kind of wide, expansive, and voracious appetite for all different kinds of work. And I mean, I see that in the kind of people who continue to be in your life and the students who you influenced. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. Maybe that's not, I mean, that's not a question, but
yeah, I think you just talked about it. That's what you're describing. Yeah. As I said, I don't know. I liked being with the students. That's a nice thing for me.
yeah.
And this slide demonstrates that. I mean, I don't know how many. The woman sitting with the white shirt is my wife, Josefa, and I don't remember many of the names. There's Tara Morley. I remember that's me in the yellow shirt, and various others. But the idea of being with the students and was important to me, and I hope that was communicated. I guess that I liked being with the students. It was something that was a sort of familial thing, and this is it's just the way it was. I don't quite know your question. It's not a question, but the idea of being with young people, and none of these people, yeah, this was 25 years ago, none of these people are young people anymore, was very important to me. Looking back on it was equally important. I would like to show a couple other things. Could you show this slide? We had an exchange with Stanford University, the Center for Computer Music and Research in Music, CCRMA. I knew somebody there, and they came to the Art Institute. They performed a concert for us there, and then we went down there with this group of students, all of which their work was shown. They were mostly performance things. One of the most important thing about that, I will say, was that these young people, when they made their resumes, they could say, I had an exhibition at Stanford University as an undergrad. And so that could be a nifty thing. I should say that woman giving the kiss there on the fourth person to the right was Jean Foss. And Jean and I, she was not a student of mine, but she was somebody that I knew at school, whom I admired greatly. And she became a very, very close friend. Rick, could you show, there's a slide, it says synesthesia. Well, there's a picture, go back there.
To this one?
That's Claire Jackal, that's me, and that's Annie Chung. But show the one that says synesthesia announcement. This one, Jean is a synesthete, a classic synesthete, and she and I organized this event at the school. And we invited a scientist from UCSF, I guess he was, dealing with visual phenomenon, and we invited a woman from New York who wrote a book about synesthesia. We packed the house. I think there was a seat to be had, and it was really fun. And Jean was terribly important in that part of my time at the Art Institute. I do want to say we're running out of time. Let me say just for 3 minutes. Would you show the slide? It says SFAI student Sally Smith. Go back. Stay with that one. One of the things that I was involved with, I substituted for a teacher at the very last minute. A teacher from the Exploratorium taught a class at the Art Institute about science. And these students, there were 1, 2, 3, 4 of them from the Art Institute in her class, proposed something about what would happen to insects if they were in non-gravitational space. And it was proposed to NASA in Houston, where they invited students to come to show their work. And it was accepted, this proposal, that the students from the Art Institute would go to Houston at NASA and present their project along with students from Harvard and MIT and every big imaginable school. And what was funny about it was that all those guys from all those schools were dying after they graduated to get jobs at NASA, and they were on their best behavior, and they were there simply to promote themselves. Whereas none of these students from the Art Institute would ever think of getting a job at NASA. And the thing about that was that it amused and I think it entertained the scientists. And the second guy from the left there is a scientist from NASA. And all the scientists from NASA, they spent the requisite time with the other schools, but they all came to again and again and again to the San Francisco Arts Institute because we were there for having a ball. And these students went up in this plane. It was called the Vomit Comet because it would fly up in the air and they would turn over like this. And for 15 seconds or something, they would have no gravity, no sense of gravity. And the idea was, what would the insects do during that time? And they found, oh, that was interesting. But as they say, the guy, he's smiling, and the reason he's smiling is because these students from the Art Institute were so crazy and they were just having a ball. And that was a wonderful thing. But there's one thing I do want to say, but that was, no, go to this purple thing. This is the sad part. There was a very happy time for me, except for the very end. Our president, Chris Bratton, had been there for a number of years, and Chris, unfortunately, the job as being president was very much over his head, and things got worse and worse. The school was always in perilous state financially, but it became worse and worse, and it became clear that something had to be done. So what they did, what the administration did, was they laid off 9 tenured faculty people, and laying off tenured faculty people was simply not done. It was done only under the most duress circumstances, and it happened at the Art Institute. There were 9 people, 7 of whom were included in a series of arbitrations and mediations. The students during this time were spectacular. They rose to the occasion, and they were the support of those of us. I was one of them. Janice Lipson was another. There were 7 of us in the final group. The students supported us. And this was a flyer that was put around the school. Could you show a picture of SFAI student Sally Smith, please? You know that one, yes. There are 2 things about this slide that are very important. One, San Francisco Art Institute. I mean, the faculty was never lectured about don't get familiar with the students or don't. But it was the huggiest place I've ever been in my life. Everybody was hugging everybody all the time. And I'm not talking about this faculty hugging the students. I'm talking about the other way around. And Sally Smith was not a student of mine, but she was at this graduation, and I think it was 2010. I'm not quite sure. She was one of the speakers that spoke at the graduation, and she was acknowledging me. I have my union badge. They were supporting the union, supporting the layings off of the students. But this purple band around her wrist, those were worn by students and other people who were at the graduations that say we support the faculty who were laid off. And a number of students I know who got into trouble with the administration for wearing those things. So there are 2 points in this thing. And again, it was a place where students were the center of the school, and those of us on the faculty, in a certain sense, were peripheral, and we had relationships with those students. Even if somebody like Sally wasn't a student of mine, she was somebody who acknowledged the fact that I was one of the people who was being laid off with this pink band or whatever it is on her. There's more to be said about that.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said. I mean, and unfortunately, I'm gonna stop sharing the photos, but I mean, of course, all of us like in the arts and people with a connection to the Bay Area are very aware of like the way that like things that were happening then at the Art Institute have just continued to escalate and spread throughout arts education. I mean, the Art Institute closed a couple of years ago. Mills was consumed by Northeastern. CCA is closing at the end of the upcoming school year. And there's like a real crisis, in arts education everywhere in this country. But I do think like anyone who was a part of the Art Institute knows how particularly unique and special the Art Institute was as a place. And it wasn't because of the place itself, even though as you talk about, the building was pretty remarkable. And I mean, those views were pretty hard to beat at night. But it was really special because of the people who were there, faculty and students, and staff. I mean, it was really a special place. And I'll just read because I think you're not seeing the chat. So I'm going to read a couple of people have posted some comments that I think I'd like you to hear. Morgan Bailey says that I was an undergraduate student of Charles, and his class was one of my favorite ever. Thank you.
Can I wanted to acknowledge some of the students I knew had signed up. Morgan, if you're there and can hear me, I thought of you, pardon me, over the years, and the idea of your writing and this stuff has stuck with me. I would be very pleased to be able to hear from you. I looked you up on the internet and I see that there's a website or something. But I'd be delighted here. Thank you for your comments here.
Yeah, and then Janice Lipson says, Charles has shown such devotion to his students, a devotion that continues today. Very impressive and full of humanity, unmatched by any of my other teaching colleagues at SFAI. And Michael Hessian wrote, Charles, so great to see you after nearly 20 years.
Say it again, who? Michael?
Michael Hessian.
Oh, yes, I can say something too.
Yeah, he said, so great to see you after nearly 20 years. I had the pleasure of working with you as a grad student in 2007 to 8. You seemingly haven't aged a day. And I would say, actually, I was going to say if people want to ask questions that they could type them in. But actually, I see that Maria has allowed people to turn their cameras on and unmute themselves. And right now I'm seeing like a group of people that I know from when I was in school. I see Prum and Sean and Richard up there. So yeah, if anyone wants to ask questions, please do.
I'm just gonna stop the recording so people don't have to be shy about it. Is that okay with you, Charles and Dicky?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.